Okay, first I want to thank Felicia Canton, Dominic Cusmano, and Michael Mirola that are here, and three professors that inspire me so much. Roberto Perrin, Franca Jacobetta, and Gabriela Scagalata, whose work is really important to me in terms of really knowing what's going on. And of course, Lucy DiPietro and the team here at the Columbus Center. For the families of the internees, silence has shaped their stories, their lives, and how they made sense of it. Sorry. As an oral historian, breaking through this wall has been my biggest challenge. I'm fascinated with this because every memory is as individual as a fingerprint, but the collective silence has left me wondering what's not there and why. It affected me in the whole process right from the beginning. As you know, I was doing the interviews in Montreal for the Columbus Center. My mandate was to interview family members from Montreal who've been affected by the internment. Now, I want you to imagine what it was like for me. I was cold calling older Italians and asking if their father had been interned during the Second World War. It sounds like a telemarketer from hell. We all were trying to avoid using the F word, fascism, but even though over 70 years had passed, it was still a taboo subject for many. So at one point, my 92-year-old mother felt pity for me and offered to make calls. I asked her, "How are you going to identify yourself on the phone?" And she gave me the stern look that could hit me against the wall. And she says to me, "I'm the daughter of an internee, Nicola Germano, and a retired teacher. They'll understand that more than oral historian." "They will listen to me," she said, and they did. Maybe it was her age, or the fact that it was a personal story, or that she voiced there was nothing to be ashamed of. She wasn't judging them. She made them feel safe. And this begs the question, why? What did they fear? Achille Corbo was a prominent and generous man in the Montreal colony. When he died in 1963, the Sons of Italy showed up at the funeral hall in full regalia. His daughter, Aida, had a spastic fit. The men were escorted out. At that point, 23 years had passed, and yet Aida still had a problem with public expressions that could be associated with that time. This was not passive indifference. It was saying that certain things were best forgotten or kept at a distance. For Achille's granddaughter, Sandra Corbo, mixing silence with unanswered questions makes her very angry. When her grandfather was arrested, she was put in an orphanage, and she had to deal with her own internment. The healing Sandra is looking for is linked to breaking that silence. Sandra Corbo. "I'm 73 and it still hurts like hell. It needs to be addressed in public because it was done to them publicly. It was a shame brought into the family. The feeling of not being worthy, of being considered a traitor. It's the public perception reflected back on me." Sandra's feelings brings up two questions. How did the public shame affect the silence? And how did the public silence affect the shame? When I went into these interviews, I thought I was going to get a whole bunch of questions answered. I actually left with more questions, theirs. Alfredo Sebastiani owned Gioconda Shoes, a very high-end designer shoe company. Everybody in Montreal wanted these shoes. Sebastiani sponsored two of his nephews in Italy, Giuseppe and Antonio Di Pietro, to come to Montreal and work with him. All three of these men were arrested. Eventually, the company, with about 1,000 employees, had to shut down. Giuseppe Di Pietro's daughter-in-law, Olga Biscotti, described the two brothers this way. "My father-in-law internalized everything, so it marked him inside where it really mattered. His brother, Antonio, which was more gregarious, and you know, when you are gregarious and you have pins thrown at you, you never recover. Because before the internment, he thought he was okay. Antonio Di Pietro never found peace after being arrested. He went from being a shoe designer of the most sought-after footwear to owning a shoe repair company, a shoe repair shop, excuse me. But what struck me the most is when I saw a picture of him in front of his shoe shop, the sign said, "Condamnerie Steve." His identity was silenced from public display. Giuseppe Di Pietro's son, Nicholas, tells us what his father thought about the unofficial apology, Nicholas Di Pietro. When Moroni apologized to the Italians, I think my father was secretly proud that it happened. Yeah, but he said, we're not going to rock the boat here. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. They got an apology, let's be zitti again, zitti. Did Giuseppe say this because it wasn't a formal public apology? Or was it because he felt more comfortable doing what they had done all these years? Mangia sta zitti. Monday, June 10th, 1940 was Vladimira della Vedova's 10th birthday. She was turning 10. That night, when her father, Angelo, came home, two RCMP officers were waiting for him. Her mother asked if Angelo could at least have a piece of birthday cake with the daughter. They refused and said, we're just going to have to talk to him. He'll be right back. Angelo came right back, February 9th, 1943. Vladimira della Vedova tells us what her father was like after he came back. I remember him saying that when he was in the camp, there was always someone behind you. You went to the bathroom and there was someone there. No matter where you went, there was a guard or someone. That was the thing that he found funniest when he came home. There was no one looking or watching him. It was strange that he was free, in a sense. Vladdy's perception captures exactly what I believe, that the barbed wire followed them home. Annibale Battigalli was a teacher and an importer. He used to bring in the wine for the Mass and Martini Rossi. His secretary was his fiancée at that point, Felicia. They worked on the 8th floor of the Castle building downtown Montreal, and on that floor there was a Viceconsul, a Gastaldi, there was a notary, there was a travel agent, the Centro Culturale. Vladdy was there when the RCMP came and started pulling out all these files out of his offices. Mind you, they also, by the way, took all the wine with them. The next day, when she showed up for work, the whole 8th floor was empty. It was that solace that sent her home. And when she went back, she spoke to some of the wives who had gone to Petawawa, and she wanted to know what had happened. When they all came back, they didn't want to talk about it. And she even wrote to her husband, or her fiancé, and he says, no, don't come. We know there was correspondence between the camp and the families. I've only read a few letters, and they sounded like the authors were very conscious of the censorship. Vito Palmieri wrote to his wife in what his daughter Antoinette describes as code. For example, the father asks about his brothers and sister, but Vito was an only child. These people didn't exist. The victim narrative is hard to resist, and scholars have argued that these men had agency. But that power over one situation was removed when the men were arrested. The families were crippled. This is when the victim motif kicks in. The everyday hardships before were normal. The hardships after the arrest were extreme. Here's an example. Giuseppe Visocchi was a chauffeur. He was arrested at a wedding with his 2 young daughters. The officers told the children, don't worry, we're just going to speak to him. He's coming right back. May 27th, 1942. His wife, Antoinette, was left in great despair. She had 7 children to care for. The older kids had to be pulled out of high school to find a little work. The bank account was frozen. She had no relief assistance. The kids had to pick up the scrap food that was left over at the market that was on the ground. The landlord wanted to throw them out. And remember, in Quebec at that time, a woman could not sign a lease. The uncles were afraid to sign the lease on Antoinette's behalf for fear of being arrested.